Hello. Thank you for listening to the Juniper Church Podcast, where we seek to grow, restore, become, and make a difference. You will be hearing a sermon today from a special guest. We are thrilled you've chosen to join us, and we pray this message finds you right where you are and leads you right to Jesus.
All right, so we're coming out of summer, and if you were lucky enough to travel, whether we went to Florida, but if you were, or maybe unlucky to travel because we hit traffic really bad. But one thing I noticed is every 20 to 30 miles, there's something where they measure weight in shipping containers, and I've always wondered, what happens if I drive over it? And it doesn't really do anything. But if you're a truck driver, it's super important because it's going to tell you about the load that you carry, and it's going to weigh you. And what you want is you want it to be, what you claim, and you want it to be, either, if not a little bit less, because the second that this load becomes too much for the truck to carry, it becomes very unsafe for the driver and for the person or for the people driving around it. It could flip if it's windy, if they're driving in traffic, especially in Atlanta, where I sat for 2.5 hours avoiding traffic in Atlanta. That was the goal, but I still hit it. If you hit traffic and you have to stop unexpectedly, the brakes could lock up and you could plow into someone in front of you. And so it becomes a burden to the truck driver, should he be carrying or she be carrying too much for them. And so what I want us to get going into this morning is that the amount above the load limit is a burden for us. Anything above that load limit can cause serious accidents, and not just the loss of the load, but the life as well. And so the author of Galatians is giving us great principles here when it comes to loads and burdens. He's telling us he wants us to help carry others' burdens, but we also should carry our own load. And there's a practical story in the Old Testament. We're going to go to Exodus 17. And here Moses had just, as I was preparing, I thought it was super fascinating. Moses had just struck a rock and water came out of it. And so he had just, he just gave water to the Israelites, and they were really unsatisfied. They were not happy. They were complaining. And Moses was like, what, why are you complaining? God just gave us water. And Moses was in a kind of a state of okay, these people are driving me crazy. I'm getting a little burnt out. I'm getting a little tired. They're begging to go back to Egypt. And so for someone who had just I can only imagine how he's feeling of, you risk your life, you're running from your captors, and, you save this whole population of people because you were called to do it, but they're asking to go back. And so I can understand Moses probably feeling, and I work with students too, and so I definitely can understand where he's coming from. But here in Exodus 17, they're preparing for a battle. And so I'm going to pick up here in verse 8. So while the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. Moses commanded Joshua, which is kind of the person he was training up to take his place, to choose some man to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us. And tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill, holding the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did what Moses had commanded and fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of a nearby hill. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand and began to get tired, the Amalekites gained the advantage. Moses' arms soon became so tired they could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands, so his hands were steady until sunset. And as a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. And so from this story, we have 4 principles of loads and burdens that we can learn from. The first being, and these first 2 are actually really pretty straightforward. I think we do a really good job at these. The last 2, those are the ones I struggle with the most, but we'll get there. So one is, I'm going to carry my own load. Joshua had his load, fighting the army of Amalek, and Moses had his, which is praying at the top of the hill. Joshua cannot be in both places, just as Moses cannot be in both places. Each needed to carry out their own assignment. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul says, I planted the seed in your hearts, and Apollos watered it, but it is God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important is that God makes the seed grow. The one who plants and the one who waters works together with the same purpose, and both will be rewarded for their own work. I love that verse because to me, it's taken the pressure off us. Yes, we have a responsibility, we have a load that we have to carry, but it's really putting it on, it's God that's going to do the work through us. But we have to say yes to the load for which we carry. I can't just show up to Walter's work and expect to sell cars for him. He will not have a job. Or maybe I'll do the best ever. I don't know. Probably not, though. I'm not trained in that. Walter could, though, however. He's so good at relationships. I do think that he could show up on a Thursday night and have a relationship with people at Kiko. And so there are things that God gives us that allows us to pick up more loads than others or in different seasons of life. God allows us to carry a heavier load should we need to, or if it's a season that we can't necessarily carry as much, then it becomes a burden. And so something I tell my students very often, so I work with middle school, high school students, and they're always complaining about school, and I tell them, if you go to tutoring, don't expect the tutor to do your homework for you. Don't expect them to take your test for you. But yet they still get mad anyways when it doesn't go their way. But our load is our responsibility. But when things start to get beyond our load limit, that's when we as believers need to live out this second principle. I'm going to carry other people's burdens, which is anything over their load. And so we notice a few things in that story of Exodus through what Aaron and Hur noticed. When Moses' hands are lifted, the Israelites are winning. But as he gets tired and his arms begin to fall and he begins to get tired, and the burden of holding this weight up, and it is a staff, but he's praying for hours and hours, they begin to lose the fight. So notice that it is Moses' load to carry as God's chosen instrument, but the burden of holding his arms up that long was getting the best of him. And so Aaron and Hur decided to come up with a plan to carry that burden. In Romans 15, it says, we who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good to build him up. And so when we carry, and this is like, these first two, I'm like, we as a church knock it out of the park. It is a pleasure, I can tell, for our church to carry burdens of others. It is delightful, that word delightful. It feels, when I see us doing it, when I see us gather, when I see us dropping off food, there's such a smile on our faces. Or there's praise reports. Our young adult chat's always going off of, it's like, I think back to when Isaac and Brooke had Abe. Yes, Abe? Nailed it. When they had Abe, Isaac was sending messages all the time of just how thankful he was. And that's not for us to gloat, but that's just how much it meant for him and for our group to be able to carry that burden of they're tired and they can't prepare food, or they can, but they shouldn't. They should rest. We have a church body that can come alongside them and help carry their burdens. If you were here back in April, you had heard that I love movies and I love Lord of the Rings. I think those two are totally different things because Lord of the Rings is a movie, but it's also an experience. It's my favorite movie. It's my favorite book. I got a tattoo of Lord of the Rings on me, of the sword from it. And so what I love about it is the relationships that we see built in it, the journey for which these two characters, Sam and Frodo, go on. Frodo is tasked with carrying this load, which is taking the ring that was inherently evil back to where it was created, to put it in the fire to destroy it. It was his load to carry. He signed up for it. But his best friend in the whole world decided to go with him. and to help take the load off and carry his burdens a little bit. It's a beautiful story. If you've never seen it, it's been out 20 years. If you haven't seen it, there's no spoilers. What a scene. What a movie, really. Again, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Desi's laughing at me. She'll never watch it. It's her loss. When I got snowed in when we got snowed in a few months ago, I watched all of them, the extended cuts, so that took up most of my time being frozen up. But I love that scene. I love it. It gives me chills. It makes me cry. I mean, this whole build-up to this movie has come to this point, and really they've lost. Like, they cannot get up there. Frodo is not strong enough to go any further. In the book, it literally, Tolkien wrote that the ring gets so heavy, so oppressive that it is so much weight to carry. And when it hits the ground, it thuds, it doesn't clink around. And so it is like a very heavy object to be so small. And Frodo had to carry him the rest of the way. And so that brings us to our next point. And these are the two hardest for me personally. But the third one is, I will not carry other people's load. Sam decided he couldn't do it. And Aaron and Hur decided also that they could not take Moses' staff from him and pray. They knew it was not their load to carry. And sometimes we do more harm than good when we try to take on other people's loads. Growing up, my parents were not the best at managing their finances, whether it was life decisions or just circumstance, and things happen. I decided when I got my first job when I was 18 that should I need to help out, if it was a burden for them, I would. But as I got older, I discovered that it wasn't necessarily a burden to them as much as it was their inability to just manage their load well. Through the debt they would take on and collect, it kind of fell to their kids to bring up the slack. And when I got married with Desi, I had to put my foot down because now it's affecting my family, my immediate family. And it was really hard to do. I love my parents, and I hated watching them, struggle. But I wasn't meant to carry their load. In Hebrews 12, it says, "No discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It's painful, but afterward there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. So take a new grip with tired hands and strengthen your weak knees. Mark out a straight path for your feet so that those who are weak and lame will not fall but become strong." What you may consider empowering someone else may actually be enabling them. For me, I was enabling my parents. I work with students, and the mental health crisis in our city and in our nation is at an all-time high. I'm a very empathetic individual, and I feel their pain, I feel their struggles, and deep down, I just want to fix it. That's kind of a personality trait, maybe for me, maybe for a lot of men, or maybe just for a lot of people. We just want to fix things. We hate seeing people suffer, and we don't want it. But if I can take them to a place where it's on them to figure out if they want the help they need. There's only so many times that I could get really scary text in the middle of the night before I'm like, are you just seeking attention or do you really need help? Because I've offered help a bunch. I've offered to find you a therapist. But what I can't do is I can't offer myself. I have to offer Jesus inside of me because I can't help them. Because if I give myself to them, and there's a difference. There's a difference between offering yourself and offering what's inside of you. If it's me, my selfish ambition trying to fix them, I'm enabling them. Whether it's a bad habit that got them feeling that way or the sin that they live in, maybe it's enabling them to stay emotionally or spiritually immature. One thing we love to do on Thursday nights is to figure out our emotions, why we feel the way we do, what is it signifying. So we do an emotion wheel. It's really fun, sometimes stressful because they all scream at you at the same time. But what I'm training them to do is to figure out that there is much more beneath the surface than just feeling sadness. The anger that we feel when we're walking home and someone makes fun of us at school, it is a check engine light. But if I just give them the easy way out and don't question them or take them to Jesus, I'm just enabling them to live in their anger and their own failure. We can't carry other people's loads because it's not realistically sustainable. And we have our own loads to keep up with. And so maybe we're sitting here right now, we're thinking of our own loads, and we're like, okay, yeah, no, I'm good at those. And I do carry other people's burdens. But maybe some of the burdens we're actually carrying are people's loads that we were never meant to carry. For the sake of that we're Christian and that we care for people. And so there is a difference. I'm not saying don't be a servant heart, but use discernment. And our last point, and this is the hardest, at least it is for me. I will let other people carry my burdens. Moses was not too proud to let Aaron and Hur carry this burden. It's pride that stops us from receiving the help that we need. Pride that tells you that you can only rely on you. Pride that makes you feel embarrassed to even ask for help. Or maybe it's pride that makes you feel like you're alone. There's people that are around us that would gladly help if we ask for it. I've seen it. I've seen this church. Or maybe there's people that you're praying for that need to ask for help, and they just won't because of pride. Maybe there's a couple of people in our mind that they just won't. And it breaks your heart every day, but until they're ready, it's not our load to carry. And that sucks. That's not a fun place to sit when you watch people that are hurting. In Exodus 18, Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for his people. And mind you, this is coming off of them asking to go back to Egypt. And he asks him, what are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all of this alone while everyone stands around you from morning to evening? And Moses replied, because the people come to me to get a ruling from God. When a dispute arises, they come to me, and I'm the one who settles the case between the quarreling. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them the instructions. This is not good. Moses' father exclaimed, you're going to wear yourself out, and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself. I didn't have this point in here, but I remember talking with my boss a long time ago that if we, and this goes for all Christians, but specifically Christians in ministry too, which I could talk all Sunday about how we are all in ministry here on earth to bring the kingdom of God here. And so I'll talk to you individually. If we carry too much, like the truck that carries way too much of a load and becomes a burden, and we crash and fail, we're not just affecting ourselves, but everyone around us. Everyone. And I've seen it so often here in Knoxville through Young Life or through other ministries, that the second that their leader deconstructs, and this is like years down the road, and stops believing in the God they proclaimed, it shatters the students, and they question everything in the same. Or maybe it's a pastor that lets his flesh get in the way and commits a sin inside of his own church, and it shatters everything. It creates more burdens on other people. And so Moses' father-in-law points out the obvious. The burdens will not only wear you out, but the people too. And so he's going to give Moses this advice. Now listen to me and let me give you a word of advice. And may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing their disputes to him, teaching them God's decrees, giving them instructions. Show them how to live their lives. but select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God, hate bribes, appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 150, and 10. He's not saying to give up your load. He sees what, Moses' father-in-law has seen what he's been called to. Keep carrying your load. Be that spiritual leader. Be that judge. Be the teacher. But let other people take the burden off you. How this applies to us this morning, we are all put in a place to carry our own load. God has called us to individual places in our lives where we have the opportunity to create what I like to call little pockets of Eden, which is where God can be experienced most, where there's safety created, where the Spirit can flourish. If our load becomes too much and things begin to burden us down, it is less likely that we want to do those things freely. The calls of people, when they call on us, it's easy to hit the silence button because we just have way too much going on. If we've not created the space to allow God to use us and we fill it with our own stuff, we're not going to be ready for when the time arises where we actually need to be used for His kingdom. Senior year, I'll have to tell that story, babe. Senior year of college, I was taking on 21 hours to graduate on time. UT did me dirty, never assigned me an advisor, and I was struggling to how do I not go an extra semester? How do I not go an extra year? I do not want more loans. And so I was like, I'm going to take 21 hours my last semester. I'm going to get it done. I had to sign a waiver that basically said UT's not liable for anything that were to happen to me, which they weren't. It was my own decision. I'd do it again. I was a leader at Ellen and STEM Academy right over here. It was their senior year as well. I was walking with about 8 students, discipling them. Those were some of the best days of my life. I enjoyed it. I felt like God was beginning to use me. I had a call in my life, and I delighted in it. Okay, so I'm leading seniors. I had a part-time job because I had to make money. And then I had a girlfriend. It was Desley. We'd been dating for that point for a couple of years now. That's a lot. That's a lot on my plate. It's a lot of loads. Something had to be a burden. Unfortunately, it was my girlfriend. That's what I picked. I allowed Desley to become a burden in my life. She broke up with me. Cruelly took us to where we had our first date. Broke up with me on that same bench. What a girl. But what it taught me, and basically it was you got to get yourself together. You got to figure this out. And what it taught me was someone to care for me enough. She cared for me so much that, she used that as a wake-up call, as a way to, hey, you're going to burn out, and you're also burning me out. You're hurting me. You're putting a little bit of your loads on me, and I don't want to carry them necessarily right now. Or maybe you're not meant to carry them. And then Nolan shows up that evening. I think she had filled him in because it was very suspicious how he just shows up when I never had texted him, now that I'm thinking about this. But yeah, Nolan shows up to just sit with me, to be with me, to hold my hands up, to wear some of that burden. And it wasn't taking an excuse that, hey, because they are related, hey, you've been hurting my cousin, you've put her on the back burner. It was out of love. It was justified. And I think that's also a place that we can show up in people's lives. It's not a void when someone does wrong, but you can wear someone's burden. You can be there for them. I had to be willing to allow myself, though, to let Nolan carry that burden, though. Do we allow others to carry a burden with us? And do we allow God to take a burden away from us? And so many of us come in from different seasons. Some of us are grieving. Some of us are worried of what the world looks like now and what it could look like later. A lot of us may just feel completely overwhelmed, making our loads heavier than they need to be, making our burdens heavier than they need to be. And so Jesus here in Matthew 11 says, "Come to me, all who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This morning I want to create space. Usually we have our prayer team come down. If you need to go to the sides, if you want to come down and sit, if you want to kneel where you are. I think a lot of us, we're 8, almost 9 months into the year, and we kind of know where our year is, where it's heading. I'm just giving you the opportunity to just let some stuff go. Maybe you've been holding on to it for years. Maybe it's a load that's become a burden because it's just so hard to let go. I'm giving you space to meet Jesus, to just open your hands and relinquish whatever he wants to take from you. Because the last thing you want is to let your burdens and your loads become your identity of who you are.
Thank you again for listening to our podcast. For more sermons from Juniper, you can follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can keep up with us at www.juniperchurch.com.